There's a few extra for anyone that wasn't here last time.
8. My book stops at 8.
Okay, well, these are last week's stuff here, so.
Right.
All right.
Cassie, I'm sorry.
Yes.
My questions all done are sitting at my kitchen table.
Okay, that's great. Well, when you get home, you'll be able to check them all out.
I know. Everything's all neat done. You know.
I know. And you always have such good, lengthy answers. They're all full of detail and information, and I know they're good ones. Sorry about that.
I went, oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, be sure and put them in your book so you'll have them at least for.
You'll probably remember.
You'll remember a lot of it.
If
So.
you had Alexa, you could probably have her read them to you.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Hey, that works.
All right, Mom, we'll start with you. Number 1.
Okay, who come up against Israel in this chapter, and what does he threaten to do? Nahash, the Amorite,
Okay.
and he threatened to put out their right eyes, so they could to bring reproach on Israel. So they would. We talked about that maybe so. We could make them weak as weaker warriors, outward signs, and make people fear him.
Good. All right. So Nahash, Nahash. The name means snake or serpent.
Right.
And that's right. He was willing to make a covenant with the people when he came in and invaded the land, but only, like Mom says, only if they would agree to him putting out the right eye of every warrior there, of every man. You know what? They said, let us think about it. Give us 7 days. You know, we'll think about it and get back to you on what it is. But you know what? It sounds pretty good. Sounds good. We'll evaluate. And so, and we talked about, like you said, military. If you close your right eye and you try and look around, you can see that there's a definite disadvantage to trying to fight that way. And not only that, bringing reproach upon the entirety of Israel. If you know, to see that many people that were deformed would certainly be lend to his reputation as a tyrant out there amongst the people, and they would be more likely to do whatever it was that he wanted in the future, which would explain why he was willing to wait those 7 days for the people to come back, is because he knew that at the end of that 7 days his reputation would be pretty strong out there among the nations. All right, number 2.
There's some past history in regards to Benjamites and Jabesh Gilead. What is the story in Judges 21:1-15? There's a lot more than just in 1-15.
But just kind of the recap on that one.
Well, I don't know where to start. Jabesh had not sent anyone to Mizpah to I can't remember. I just know that the Benjamites the guy had his concubine killed by Benjamites that were wicked, and the tribes went against the Benjamites. There weren't very many left, so then they took wives from Jabesh Gilead and gave them to the Benjamites so the tribe wouldn't die out. And nobody from Jabesh Gilead came to Mizpah to help defend something. And,
Okay.
anyway.
Yeah. No, that's good.
The virgins.
The Benjamites had not come in to assist when they should have come in to assist, and so they went in and they not the Benjamites.
No, they were the bad guys.
The Jabesh Gilead.
The Jabesh Gilead people had not come in to help, and so they went in and they wiped the area out. For the point for our story, like Marianne says, it is a long story, but the point for our story is they found 300 virgins, 400 virgins in the tribe that they gave to the Benjamites. Okay, so then there was a linkage of the Benjamites and the virgins from Jabesh Gilead. So there's a familial unit there now. So there's more than just there's a deeper connection there between the Benjamites and the Jabesh Gilead people. Remember, who is Saul? A Benjamite, right? And so when he hears about this information happening in Jabesh Gilead, it's important to remember that not that long ago, there's this past history going on. So the tie and connection between them was deeper than what it might appear on the surface if you didn't know this story. So that's just kind of an interesting little point, and just another example of how when you don't know the whole story and you just get a glimpse of it, sometimes you don't really see those underlying connections, but generally you can find them in Scripture. There's all these tie-ins to all of these things, and so that's the one for that.
Thanks a lot for giving me that one.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that one. All right, let's go to the next one. Sherry, do you happen to remember what causes Saul to respond so forcefully?
Well, you said he was a Benjamin.
Okay, that is definitely true.
The Spirit of the Lord came on him.
The
Yeah,
Spirit of
that's
the
what
Lord
they-
came upon him, and what happened? He was filled with a
Righteous
anger. And so that righteous anger, we talked about how you can be angry and not sin when there's a righteous cause. And so God expected Saul to do something here, and so that anger that came up was a righteous anger brought on by the Spirit of the Lord.
It was directed at sin. It was a righteous anger because it was directed because of the sin, right?
Because
Am I
there was
saying-
because there was evil being done there, and
The serpent was against
yeah,
his
yeah,
people,
and-
and he needed to protect them.
yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Okay, the people at Jabesh Gilead put out an all points for help.
Yes.
The whole of Israel came to help.
Okay.
Okay, and then these guys did not go into battle.
No.
No, this was
We're
previous.
talking about
history.
we're talking about history. It's in Judges.
Okay.
You can read about it. It's a previous
I did.
history that had happened between the Benjamites and Jabesh Gilead. Not this experience, but because
okay.
of that previous time, it sort of lends to the story of what happens here with Saul because of the history that had occurred earlier with that.
I did read that.
Okay, good. All right, number 4. Let's see, you weren't here, so
How does he get the word, I guess Saul,
Yes.
get the word out that a war is coming? He took a yoke of oxen and cut them into pieces, and he sent the pieces throughout the territory, warning whoever did not go to battle with Saul and Samuel, he would do the same to their oxen.
isn't that amazing? I guess that's one way to communicate when you don't have cell phones. And
There's a tie in there too because
I got the tail.
that's what the man did with his concubine.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was what Jabesh Gilead hadn't responded to.
that's exactly right. That's
Right.
exactly right.
He cut her up in pieces.
Yep, and sent her out amongst the tribes.
Well, and the
Now,
Over.
where did we hear that?
That's the story of Jabesh Gilead.
Oh,
That,
I
that,
see.
that was it, yeah.
21.
Part of about them killing them.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
that history that
well,
had been there before.
and the principle there with the man and the concubine is an inordinate affection for yourself that he had. You know?
Okay,
So he sends out someone he should protect.
okay,
And anyway,
okay,
we find that here and there.
okay. And so in this particular case, Saul does the same type of thing. He takes the yoke of oxen, he cuts it into pieces, he sends it out to all of the tribes, and expects a response. We talked last week about how interesting it is to think about how would you physically do that? How do you do that? How do you go? You've seen the maps, you recognize the land layout and all of that. How do you get these pieces of meat that are cut up out there with the story out there? I don't know. I don't have the answer. But it's just interesting to...
Well,
Maybe
and
they
it
have that
seems,
pecan thing.
and it seems too that by the time they got there,
And rotten.
it would be pretty rotten, nasty.
Well, that doesn't matter.
They'd still get the message.
Quite fresh.
You know, you're just
A little
even
more so.
Me.
I know. It's just interesting to think about how that all plays out, isn't it? Yeah. No, I agree. But whatever, however it
right.
happened and however he did it, it was quite effective because number 5.
How many came when he called? In Israel, 300,000, and from Judah, 30,000.
Okay.
Isn't that where you changed the numbers?
No.
Oh, okay. that's
No,
weird.
that is 300,000 came from Israel, 30,000 came from Judah. Remember, we talked last week, if you weren't here, you don't remember, but last week we discussed the fact that this shows pretty clearly that this was written at a later date. We already know that these events are not written about as right when they happened, but later on, because we know that the kingdom was divided. So the northern kingdom was called Israel, and then of course the southern kingdom of Judah and Benjamin was called Judah. And so because here they're divided, and it talks about how many came from Israel and how many came from Judah, and they're divided and not together, we know that this was likely written at the time when there was division in the land, which is going to come quite a bit later.
Thank you for clearing that up, because I wondered, when I read that, I just put 330,000, but I wondered, why didn't they just add it together and save a little space?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a really good
That's
indication
good, yeah.
that this was written at the time that the kingdom was divided, which isn't going to happen until Solomon dies. So we know that that's down the road, 100 years or so, whatever it is, that there's going to be that division. Right, number 6.
What plan was made to rescue the men of Jabesh Gilead? The Israelites came and killed the Amorites. Well, I guess that doesn't really answer the question. And all the survivors were scattered, so I guess I didn't answer the question.
Well, that's part of it. There may be some more to it, but that's part of it. Anybody have anything to add to that?
The people of Jabesh Gilead, knowing that reinforcements were coming, told Nahash they would surrender tomorrow. Next day, the reinforcements ambushed the Ammonites.
Okay.
They told him they would surrender by noon the next day, and he went in at 3 o'clock in the morning
Good.
and got them before they were expecting.
Good. You guys were really listening to that story. Good job. So, exactly. He told them by noon tomorrow, we'll come out and surrender to you. And he went in, and Saul and his 3-pronged attack company, he divided them into 3 sections, went in starting at that early morning time frame from 3 to 6 in the morning, still dusky dark, and went in and began the slaughter. And it said they slaughtered all the way until noon. So it took them all by surprise, and was able to overcome those people. All right, number 7.
Amorites.
Ammonites. The ones who wanted to put out their right eye. All right, so we're now at number 7.
The people were quite happy with the results. How did they show their admiration for Saul, and what did he do? Okay, they went to Gilgal and made Saul king before the Lord, and they made a peace sacrifice. Let me get over here. Offering before the Lord, and showing Saul, as you put it, Saul's our guy.
Okay.
They were showing that, and they were bringing the men. And when they said that they would bring the men and put them to death, and Saul said no.
Right.
He was against that.
Okay, and what men were they talking about?
Anybody who wouldn't follow him.
Any of the ones that despised him before, because
Okay.
they thought he was an unfit king.
So all of those people who didn't immediately support Saul and said, who is he to reign over us? They said, hey, bring us those men because we're going to kill them now. Showing that they completely, totally supported Saul at this point.
So that's what you mean by what had he done?
What had he done? What had he done and what he had done? How did they show their admiration for Saul and what he had done?
Oh, okay, just.
So all of that answer is to that. And then the second part of that is, how did Saul respond, Marianne?
He said, no one will die today. He gave the Lord glory for the accomplishment.
Okay. So this is a good mark for Saul. He says, no man shall die today. The Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel. So that's a good moment for Saul. He doesn't take the glory for what's done, for this little plan that he's come up, but instead he gives the glory to the Lord in that. And he doesn't want those men who didn't support him to be punished, which is really important because at this point, at the early birthing of this, the last thing you need is division. You know, division amongst the people and who was right and who was wrong, and to have people killed and their families upset and all of that. So it was a really wise decision, and showing that Saul is, at this point at least, early on, working under the Spirit of the Lord. And so that's a good thing. It doesn't last long, but it's a good thing. All right, number 9. Sherry?
Oh, well, it would appear that Samuel is ready to do what, as he begins to address the people of Israel in chapter 12. And he repents of every tiny sin that he ever might have done.
Okay.
And talks about having a clean slate.
Okay.
Completely.
Okay. And what is it that he's, what is it that he's, by doing all of that you just mentioned, what is it that he's preparing to do?
To die.
To quit, you think?
Hand
No,
over
he
the
I don't
doesn't
think
reins to
he's,
Saul.
I don't think he's quitting, but he's,
Hand over the governmental reins to Saul.
there you go. He's beginning to hand over the power and authority that he had solely on his own for the nation of Israel. He's beginning to hand over some of that power and authority to Saul. We know that he didn't quit totally because it says that Samuel was a judge for the entirety of his life. And so, did you have a question?
Yeah, it says, what would it appear? And to me it appeared that he felt rejected.
Oh, okay.
And that he would like to quit.
Oh,
He
okay.
didn't get that permission from God, but that's what it looked like to me.
Okay.
He was saying, I feel that he felt rejected.
Okay. Okay. Well,
I
that,
thought since he talked about, they talked about him being an old man by then, that he was thinking, I'm at the end of my life.
Sure.
I'm dying. I could die at any time, so I want to make this.
well, you just want to get your
Yeah.
affairs in order,
Right.
and remember, he said, my sons are
the
now,
Lord's dead.
my sons are now out there with you. They're not going to be following in my footsteps. They're, you know, and I've done nothing to offend anyone, and so he's sort of getting all of his
Preparing for his
affairs
death,
in order on what needs to be done. And someone else is now coming along, and this person has been selected by the Lord, and so when this new person comes in, Samuel, by all rights, needs to understand that this is under the authority of the Lord, and so the power and authority that he was solely controlling is now going to move over to this new person, Saul. All right, number 10.
I agree with what you just said.
Okay.
It kind of answers number 10 too. That he reminded them he'd not wronged any of them, that he'd been clean, that he'd served the Lord the best he could.
Yes.
And how would you judge that? Well, we admire him,
Okay.
and he really followed what the Lord said.
Okay.
That's the part that would be so important, that whatever God told him, he did it.
Okay. So we know that he was a faithful servant, and how would you judge him? You could also say that the fruit of his labors is no man had anything against him, right? I mean, how many people can say that in their lifetime? When they leave this world, say, no one has anything or any hard feelings against me. I've made everything right with everyone. That's not an easy thing to leave this world that way. Go ahead.
Well, and he also pointed them in the direction of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
You know, follow the Lord in
Right.
truth and with your
And at
heart.
this point, where was the direction? What was the direction of the Lord at this point, right now? To Saul. To Saul, you know? And so he's making that transition easier also, as it should be. I think it's a really good example of someone being very humble enough to relinquish some authority that you have. That's a really difficult thing when you're in control of a situation, to step back and turn that over. I don't care if it's a ministry leader or anything that you do in your life, to step back and hand that over willingly to someone else while you still maybe feel like you could do it is a difficult thing. So Samuel is doing all of that in the right way, and that's how we know that he had been a faithful servant. Yep, it's a hard thing. All right, number 11.
But you can think of
As he begins to go over the history of the people, it is obvious that the Lord God has saved them in the past. No need for a king.
All right, so he goes over and tells them all the history of the people, and they did just fine, didn't they? Because God was their leader. God was in control. God saw everything that they needed as a nation and provided for them. So at that point, they didn't need a king. 12.
Next, he tells the people that when they did need guidance, God provided them whom? Moses and Aaron?
Okay, and there were some other people. Do you remember who they were? You don't have to remember their names, but do you remember?
Priests and prophets.
Judges.
Oh,
The
okay.
prophets.
The judges. These were specifically the judges that he had, and we talked a little bit about the fact that the judges were specific people appointed by God for specific times. They didn't necessarily rule and reign their entire lifetime like Samuel. In fact, they didn't rule and reign like Samuel did for their entire lifetime, but there was a period of time where God needed someone to come in and sort of bring the people back to where they needed to go, because this is the time period where every man was doing what was right in his own eyes, and God needed that to be reined in, and so he would send individuals, and we talked about a couple of them are named there, Gideon being one, and Samuel lists himself in there as one of them, and so they're people that God had appointed for specific times. So they didn't need a king when God was providing for them, and then when they did need some help, God also provided the judges. And now 13.
Okay, now they have made a decision to ditch all of that tall, good-looking king. What command does God tell them in regards to following their choice of king? If they fear the Lord and will serve him and obey his voice, both them and their king, it would be good.
Okay.
But if they and their king does not obey God's hand will be against them.
Okay. All right. So to serve the Lord with all your heart, to fear the Lord, consider all the great things he has done. I mean, all of those things. What's he telling them? Your focus still, just because that there's a man now involved in this, don't take your focus off the Lord. Don't take your eyes off of him. Consider and remember all the great things that he has done. I think it's interesting. I'm teaching through the feasts on Sunday mornings, and I think it's so interesting to remember that the importance of any event in God's program for the children of Israel was always remember. Remember what I've done. Remember and tell your children. Remember that the harvest is provided for you. Remember with your first fruits that it comes. Remember when you take the leaven out of the bread. Remember when, whatever it is that's going to happen in any event, it's always that don't forget what the Lord has done for you. And I was thinking about it and I thought, I think it's because that's what we all do. Mm-hmm. We remember a few times and then we don't think about it anymore. Well, I thanked the Lord for that, and so I already thanked him. But that ongoing praise and acceptance and remembrance of what God has done, we're so negligent as people and kind of lazy in that if God didn't set up these specific time frames, particularly I'm thinking the feasts, these moedim, these consecrated appointed times for them to come and remember, they'd forget. And we see that over and over, that even with all of those times being appointed unto them, they still forget. So I found that interesting that
That's part of why we do communion.
it is.
Try to help us remember.
It is. Remembering is an important
we
thing.
needed that.
And that's why we're supposed to look into the Word. every day.
That's
because
right.
we forget what we look like.
That's
We
right.
forget what he wants to do for us.
That's right. That's right. And
We
so
forget
there's
about
that
ourselves.
that whole thing of, oh well, I mean, you know, if you ever get to the point where you can say, I read the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation, I've read it all. Well, you know what? Go back and start over again, because there's always things in there that God needs to speak to us about, and that we need to continually be refreshing ourselves and remembering. All right.
What affirmation sign does God send to let them know he is still in charge? He sent thunder and rain on their wheat harvest, which was unusual and not good for the crops.
All right. So that was the affirmation sign, letting them know it was out of season. The wheat harvest we discussed is a May-June time frame. Israel doesn't have rain in May-June. Israel has early rains in the early part of the spring, and they have the latter rains in the latter part of the fall, but they do not have rain during this time. And so God said, just to show you that you think that you're running this show, I'm still in charge. I am going to send rain and thunder at a time when it's out of season.
Did it destroy the wheat?
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. Yeah, that was not a
Kathy, I
time.
thought it was interesting how that Samuel called to the Lord for the rain and the thunder, and then how the people greatly feared. That's what it says. Greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. So they knew his power. You know, his power he really had. So that would be very hard to say. And here's now Saul. You know, it would be hard to give him that kind of trust and stuff.
But once that rain and thunder came, what immediately happened after that? All the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God. Your God.
Yeah.
To the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all of our sins the evil of asking for a king for ourselves. So it was, I mean, he was told, they were told over and over, even at the very beginning when he said, if you get a king, here's what he's going to do. He's going to do this to your sons, this to your daughters, this to your servants, this to your fields, this to your olive groves, and this to your flocks. And they still wanted it. They still wanted it. And then he went over it again and he said, I've always been there for you. You don't need anyone else. I'm always for you. And they still wanted it. But when he sent the rain and thunder and it likely destroyed their crops, they said, oh dear, we've sinned. That we've asked for a king when we shouldn't have asked for a king. So
I had missed that, the evil of asking, that they had repented at that time.
yes, yeah.
I missed that.
They and Samuel tells them, do not fear, because I didn't ask a question about this, but verse 22 is such a key part of this when it says, for the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. And so that's Samuel telling them in verse 22, he's not going to completely disregard you, even though you've made this decision and now you're repenting of it and now you recognize it. God will not forsake you. Why? Because you guys are amazing and wonderful. No, but because for his name's sake, God has chosen you as his people, and he will not forsake you. So that verse 22 is really the key one there. All right, very good. Well, let's start with verse 13.
When it comes to my turn to read, I'm going to skip. My eyes are a little blurry.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. But